So I'm going to call the September 9th meeting of the Circulation ILL Advisory Group to order. It is 9:30 a.m. exactly. So it looks like we have everyone on the committee here, and just to kind of go through names, we've got Bob from Zion Benton, Kim from Wilmette, Belinda from Algonquin, Rachel from Lake Villa, Alicia from Round Lake, Anne from Prospect Heights, Courtney from Winnetka. And it looks like we do have a guest. So hey, Karen, thanks for joining us. Let me just make a note here. From Palatine. Okay. And like I said, we're going to pause the recording to do our icebreaker. Okay. So the first thing I always like to do at the start of a new fiscal year, we have some new members in the group, is to just kind of give an overview of what this group is, just kind of review the purpose of the advisory group, what you can expect from meetings, and what your role is as a committee member. So basically, advisory groups are consultants for CCS, right? So these groups consult on things like system configuration changes, policy changes, best practices. So often as a group, we'll form a recommendation for how to move forward with a topic or question, and we'll take that recommendation to the wider technical group for approval. So our meetings typically consist of both action items where we'll be making a decision or a recommendation, and then just discussion items where we may just be looking for some input, just getting a general feeling for an idea or a question, looking for insight, that sort of thing. Now, your role as a committee member is to represent CCS as a whole. So, while you're lending your own voice and your own like individual experiences and roles in your libraries, when making decisions, you just need to keep in mind we are making decisions for CCS libraries as a whole. We will plan for 4 advisory group meetings a year. These meetings will be virtual. And then in addition to these 4 meetings, advisory group members should plan to attend their respective technical group meetings. So if you primarily work in like as an ILL staff member, you'll attend the ILL tech meetings. If you're primarily CIRC member, you'll attend the CIRC meetings. And that's just so that when we are presenting a recommendation, like we've got some committee members there to give context to the discussion and help CCS present if need be. And then there may be also times we need to consult with the group, like in between advisory group meetings. And if that situation does come up, we'll just communicate via email together. In the agenda packet, I shared the decision matrix. We do follow this matrix when making decisions and approving decisions. So just to kind of give an overview of this, for decisions that aren't going to require a change to workflow and don't have like a financial or a staffing impact, the advisory group, you'll be making a decision, or I'm sorry, a recommendation to CCS, and then we will act on that recommendation. Now, for things that requires a change to workflow, so for example, you've seen in the past, like we've established procedures on how to manage claimed items or do damaged items. We'll take your recommendation to the technical group for final approval. And then finally, if we have a decision that involves any kind of financial impact, staffing change, or requires a policy change, we'll take that decision to the technical group first. And if they agree with our recommendation, then we'll take it to governing board for a formal approval. So those will be decisions like, everyone's going to be using this new piece of software, or, everyone is going to start collecting a piece of patron data in registration, that sort of thing. And then finally, here are the meeting dates. So this is what we'll plan for. And then if you've been a part of the group, you've seen that if we don't have anything for our agenda, we will cancel the meeting. So you will get advance notice about whether we're going to hold a meeting or if it's going to be canceled or postponed. Any questions on that? In that case, let's get to our first agenda topic. So this is an action item. So we are looking for a recommendation to the group. Our first topic is we want to evaluate and form a recommendation around permissions in the interlibrary loan / books by mail permission group. You'll hear me shorthand that to ILL BBM. So this topic came onto our radar after discussion at the past couple interlibrary loan technical group meetings, where we talked about billed ILL items and like changing item prices. So for some background, and as I go through this, if you have any questions that come to mind or have any comments, please do not hesitate to just kind of interject or interrupt me. So for background on this topic, permissions in the interlibrary loan group, they're focused more on like placing and modifying interlibrary loan requests and receiving that interlibrary loan request record. But the ILL permission group by itself does not come with permissions to edit item records, which includes the item price. So currently, in order to edit an item record, including the price field, staff need to be one of these 3 permission groups. They need to be in the cataloging 1 group, the public services item editing group, or the circulation managers permission group. Now, if you haven't worked with interlibrary loan items too much, when an ILL request record is received in LEAP, a temporary item record is created. And the database will apply a default price to that record. Now, staff who do have item editing permissions, so are one of those 3 groups, they can additionally edit the price field in the temporary item record, and they can change that default price to reflect the actual price of the item. And that way, if the item becomes lost and billed to the patron will be charged whatever's in that item price field. If that field is blank, they'll be charged the default amount. However, again, staff in the ILL permission group who are not additionally in an item editing group won't be able themselves to edit the price or any other fields in the item record if needed. So they'll need to tap into a coworker with the appropriate permissions to update that item price. So again, our question is, should item editing permissions be added to the ILL BBM permission group? Now, one thing to keep in mind, in addition to price, adding permissions to the group would also give staff the ability to edit most fields under the item record details tab. So as you see here, this also includes things, fields such as like the item branch, the owning branch, the assigned branches. It allows you to modify the shelf location and the collection and the barcode of the item. Another thing to note is that permissions cannot be scoped to just ILL item records. So staff would have the ability to edit these fields in all item records assigned to your library. So additionally, we should look at like how many staff would be impacted by our decision or our recommendation today. So as of August 28th, we have 628 staff who are part of the ILL Books by Mail permission group. And of those staff, roughly 92% are also part of a group with item editing permissions. roughly 8% of ILL books by mail staff do not have item editing permissions. So our recommendation today would impact those 8%. And one thing we can't determine by looking just at these numbers is what roles these individual staff are in. I did link to a list of staff who are in the ILL BBM permission group and indicated whether or not they do have item editing permissions in the agenda packet, in case you wanted to see who in your library does or does not have the permissions.
Can I ask a question about that number? Is there any one library that has that 8%, and maybe that could be a factor? I'm trying to pull up the ILL permissions. Maybe it's, yeah, if it's just 56 staff member or 52 staff members and one library falls under that category, maybe it's something we can, I'm just talking, but
No,
just something to think about. Is it one library or is it multiple libraries for those 52 staff members?
It was more than one library. There were, I would say the majority of libraries, though, most libraries did have all of their ILL staff in a permission, item editing permission group. So I think there's definitely individual libraries that have it structured, that we could call up, that have it structured differently.
I know we have a pretty good chunk of those, actually. We've got like 10 or 11, I think, because we have all CERC staff also with ILL permissions. And I mean, for me, I have no problem with them also having item editing permissions. In fact, I think it might be helpful so that they can change item status for things like repair from the item record rather than just through the check-in screen. I can't speak for the other libraries, but for my about 1/5 of that chunk, I can say that.
Yeah, that's helpful to know.
Does cataloging CCS group have any feedback about this either, since the errors would be going to them versus us? I just wondered if they should have a point in this, because at our library, it is very hard to get a cataloging 1 permission. It is like nailed down to the ground, and only typically catalogers have those, with a couple people in between.
This topic has not gone to the catalogers yet.
Okay.
And Miyako, just to clarify, if we were to add item editing permissions to this group, a staff member would only be able to edit items by your library unless they had kind of expanded permissions beyond the groups you mentioned, right?
That is correct. So the two options we're looking at today is if these item editing permissions should be added to the ILL group, or if interlibrary loan permissions should be left as is, with the understanding that staff can always add their ILL staff to one of the existing permission groups. So, Round Lake you've got all of your CERC staff in the ILL group, and trying to think here, would there be an issue then if you added those staff to like the public services item editing group? So one thing I should also mention too, let me go back to my slides here. I think this information is in the packet, and I don't think I have it in a slide. So in terms of the other permission groups, this is what staff would have access to. So with public services item editing, which I would say is the most common editing group that ILL staff are a part of, staff would also be able to perform an item bulk change. So they'd be able to edit all fields in an item record, and they would also be able to bulk change items. Cataloging one comes with more additional permissions. You can also edit like bib records. There was an additional permission or two in there. And then with circulation managers, you have the ability then as well to do patron bulk change and remove deposits from patron records.
I would say for Round Lake, most of circulation wouldn't use those additional features. So it honestly probably wouldn't make too much of a difference which way we went with it. There's only 2 of us who right now would need to go into an ILL item record to edit that. So it wouldn't really impact that part of it for us. It's more that if we did make the decision to let the ILL BVM permission group also have item editing, I would be fine with that either way. Because I do think it would be nice if circ staff could edit the items like through the item record, just for those changing the item status.
I'm going to stop sharing my presentation just for a second so I can see everyone while we discuss.
So at my library, our ILL department is basically me. So I create the majority of the records. And so I usually know what's going on with everything. And so I kind of like it the way it is because we do have a few people that tend to go in and change things without talking to anyone. So I like adding people as we go. I like that method, the way we have it now.
I don't do any of the ILL at our library, but I would prefer to make the decision myself who would have permissions or whatever, that rather than make, guarantee everybody has it and then, so I think I'd go with the leave as is.
I am of the same mind too. I would rather be able to give someone more permissions than have too many permissions to begin with.
Same for me.
I would agree with that.
I believe at Lake Villa, the ILL staff do have the permissions, but I don't know that anybody beyond that group does. And I don't know that they would need to be quite honest.
So it sounds like everyone is pretty much in agreement that it'd be better to leave the permission group as is, and then just allow staff to be added in to item editing groups as they need. Okay. That sounds great to me. Sorry, let me get out of my position here. Deborah, meeting question for you. If we're not like actually making a recommendation for a change, do we need a formal motion?
I don't think so. Yeah, I think you're good.
I don't think so either.
Great. In that case, we'll leave it as is, and we will just let staff know that if they do find they have need to edit the price field, we can add them to the item editing permission group. Great. Excellent. That was thank you. That was easy one to determine. So let me share my screen again. We'll move on to our next topic. So the next thing I want to talk about is children of separated parents and multiple library cards. So for some background on this, so we do have a section in the circulation manual that addresses users with multiple library cards. And while this section calls out users who own property in multiple library service areas, it does not call out children of separated parents who live in different service areas. And this is a shortcoming on my part when drafting this section initially, because looking at notes when we originally talked about this topic in the advisory group, children of separated parents was an example that we pointed to. So during that first discussion, the advisory group at the time was unanimous that these situations are valid situations where the users may have multiple library cards in the database. But again, the reference to children of separated parents is not in that section of the CIRC manual. And so when a library recently encountered this situation, there was really nothing explicit that they could point to in the manual for guidance. So I think there's definitely needs to revise this section to include some type of reference in there. During our initial discussion, I did check in with the state library and with Rails on these users who are with multiple library cards. And both agencies confirmed that there are no existing statutes that would deny an owner of multiple properties from receiving a card from each area that they pay taxes to. And also that there are no state statutes relating to library card access for children of separated parents. So Rails' response to the question was that access for children of separated parents is up to local library policy, essentially. So I'm checking in again with both institutions just to make sure nothing's changed in the meantime, and this is all still the case. However, we do want to revise the users with multiple library cards entry to include children of separated parents who live in different library service areas. So here is the proposed draft. The changes, proposed changes are in red. So there's really three main edits here. The first one is the section at the first paragraph that references property owner or persons who rent or lease the property, or children of separated parents who each reside in different library service areas. So it's calling out both situations. The second edit is just to include Rails' response that library card access can be determined by local library policy. And the third edit here is just to include a statement just confirming that libraries may also issue a separate library card to a child of separated parents if that child has an existing account at a different library and such access follows local policy. So it's basically calling out the that there's no state statutes preventing these situations, calling out that libraries are able to follow local policy for these situations, and just making sure that both multiple property owners and children of separated parents are defined here. So I wanted to get your thoughts on the drafted revisions, just to see if this provides enough clarification for issuing cards to children whose parents are separated and live in different library communities. Now I'll give you a moment to read it over.
Miyako. In the first red sentence, I think the word each should be removed, because is each referring to the parents or the children?
Good call.
Do you think we should put an age in there instead of just saying children? Like maybe clarify that?
Yeah, make sure we define that it's a child is age under the age of 18.
So what do you for sometimes a child is considered 20 up to age 26 based upon sometimes 24, depending upon, I believe it's the county. If you have a child with some form of disability, that they may be from separated. So I understand the age of children and things along those lines, but you may also have someone who is a caregiver or primary guardian or still the parent. I don't know. I would want to be as inclusive as possible with that language, but I'm not quite sure how else to kind of word that. Does that,
Hmm.
does that
Yeah.
make sense?
That makes sense. So would,
I have to pull up the thesaurus. Hold on.
okay.
I feel like dependent isn't it either, but I know what you're saying because, and especially when we're trying to be more specific, you know, I mean, I mean, we could just dive through and go on forever, but that doesn't seem like a far reach. It seems like it should definitely be in there. So
Wouldn't
Yeah, I like the-
dependent work? Wouldn't the word dependent work in that case?
I think that's what's considered when you think about traditional law is dependent, primary dependent, or in taxes, if you have kids, isn't, I think it's considered when you get that nice tax deduction for some who have kids.
Makes sense. So we could, when we reference children, we could say dependent children or dependents of separated parents. So I'm going to stop sharing just for a second, make some edits to, add in some edits to that draft, and then see what you think. So let me just copy and paste this into a Word file here. Okay, and then we're going to just replace children with dependents. Okay. I'm going to share my screen again, and let's take a look at the edits. So this, oh, of course, that's the wrong doc. Okay. Per this, let's see, staff should refer to, and then it references a specific code. Per the statute, an individual who owns or leases property for that is taxed for service area in multiple, can't read, tax for library service in multiple library service areas may receive a card from each library. This may include property owner or persons who rent, release the property, or dependents of separated parents who reside in different library service areas. There is no prohibition in this statute that would deny an individual paying taxes to 2 or more libraries from receiving a library card from each. Library card access for dependents of separated parents can be determined by local library policy. Libraries may issue a separate card to a user with an existing account if that user owns or leases property within the library's service areas. Libraries may also issue a separate library card to a dependent of separated parents if the dependent, let's fix that spelling, has an existing account at a different library and such access follows local library policy. The patron will essentially have 2 more home library cards.
sharing The wrong screen
Oh
potentially.
gosh, am I?
Edits, yeah.
I'm so sorry. Let's try this again.
I have not figured out how to share my screen in Zoom after even 2.5 years of Zooming.
Okay. This
There we
should
go.
be the one with edits. Hopefully it's just a plain old Word doc. I won't read, I'll spare you me reading it again.
I'm okay with it.
I think this is good.
Yep, I agree.
Yep, I agree as well.
I do have a question though.
Yes.
So in terms of a situation where maybe they have a card at another library, but that library card has some kind of issue, like fines, for example, is that going to fall under local library policy in terms of how the library chooses to deal with that, whether or not to issue a card?
So my initial reaction is that we could point to,
This happened in Evanston, if that helps. We had a parent who refused to pay for bills. So we ended up creating a secondary card for the child because we did not want the child not to have access to the system. And I may lose you, my battery's about to die. But we made the decision that a child having a book was more important than a bill to be paid. And I think letting a local library, because you don't know the situation at home. There could be a financial situation with one parent over another. I don't know if there's anything NECO or CCS policy that governs differently, but I feel like child or dependent should have the ability to still access things, but that would be my personal thing and what I would do at my library.
And I think the language in this is basically giving us that power. We can make that choice, whether at our local library level, that's something we want to do or not. So yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and I think typically when you're re-registering a patron to your library, of course, we have that in our policy that any outstanding fees should be resolved prior to doing that. But I would agree that this gives you the agency that if, this is a situation with a dependent of separated parents, to use your best judgment in issuing a new card.
No, that sounds great to me.
any other comments or questions? In that case, may I have a motion to recommend the drafted changes?
I move
I
to
recommend.
recommend the drafted changes. Anne from Prospect Heights.
In a
Rachel
sec.
from Lakeville.
And a Rachel will second. Any, all in favor
Aye.
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 and any opposed? So we'll bring this recommendation to the October circulation technical group for formal approval of the draft. In that case, we're going to get to our last topic. Make sure I'm sharing my screen to the right thing this time. So the final topic is purely a discussion, it's not an action item. And it relates to migrations. So one thing that we've been talking about and thinking about at CCS is what our next library migration is going to look like, specifically the training part. So before the pandemic, we only offered in-person training during a migration. Then during the pandemic, our last migration, I was only able to offer virtual training, majority of which was in the format of like self-paced online courses. So we're thinking for our next library migration, we're likely use a blended training strategy, which means that we'll combine both the virtual asynchronous training, so things like the pre-recorded videos, those software simulations, PDF handouts that staff can read through, and both like the in-person sessions. Now we have not done a migration using a blended training, and we really want to figure out what's the most effective approach to this. So what kind of things would be most helpful as an in-person session? What kind of things is better to present like a video format? And then the other part of this discussion is that we want to be able to provide recommendations for internal training to the incoming libraries, which are things like your library's staff-led trainings, local trainings activities you guys did like in your departments or just in your libraries as a whole, and like how your library held staff accountable for completing training. So everyone in this group was actually here for the big migration to Polaris in 2018. So I figured this group would have some really great like hindsight insight to what worked, and like what maybe could have been done like differently. So this is really just to get your perspective. The agenda packet had some questions in there, and I would like to pose those questions to you now. So if you have anything you want to throw out, feel free. Otherwise, I will kind of launch into the first question on the list. The first question is, what did your libraries do to provide training, like internally provide training during that 2017-2018 migration?
We did both, actually. We did some group training on topics, like I talked about the circulation effects, but we also did, and those of you who know Gary, he put together all these like self-taught following processes so people could take a test, get a little practice, take a test type of thing. He just really loved all that stuff. And I mean, he still does. But anyway, so he did that. So honestly, we were doing it blended, I think, even way back then.
Yeah. And the processes that Gary put together, were they just kind of like step-by-step on how to do a thing?
It was a little bit of that, but it was also because he's obsessed with record sets, those who know him. I mean, and we all here are like, oh, here we go with the record sets. I'd be happy, Miyako, I'll share some. I know they're still on our staff blog, but they were very specific to our tasks. So circulation ones were circulation, how that affects record sets. That's the one that's coming to mind just because I know he's obsessed with those. I'm trying to think of other ones, but in other words, we were doing both. We did some self studying, and then we did some group exercises.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. We were kind of the same way. I think we also took a blended approach. Our assistant director went and actually created a bunch of training videos for each department. And then management all went to the in-person training when we could. And then we had group sessions for all of the other staff by department. And after that, it was a lot of people trying things on their own, experimenting with the database, and then individual training as needed, if anybody needed additional help with anything.
I will be honest to tell you that I don't remember. And here's why I don't remember, because I was not a full-time employee here at the time. I was a very, very, very part-time employee. And so Maureen, my predecessor, did all that training, and then she left, and then I stepped in. Well, obviously I was trained somehow because I did step into the role. But it must have been a blend of, I don't know. Sorry,
It's okay.
that was 5 years ago. Come on, Miko. Are you kidding?
Ours was a blended approach.
Same at Winnetka. We basically did the same thing, blended approach. We had departments do different, like checklists for each department on what they would need to learn. And then management were the ones that usually did the in-person for CCS.
I was at Evanston at the time, and it was a blended approach, but we also partnered with one of our area libraries. I partnered with Tori and got some staff that weren't able to attend our trainings to go up to her trainings. So we did kind of do that to kind of get a different perspective of how things happen too.
And then did each department get to determine, like Courtney mentioned, like the checklist of things? Did each department kind of get to determine what to train their staff on, and like what were the checkpoints for knowledge, or was there any kind of like singular training coordinator?
We did each manager of the department was in charge of like different parts of LEAP training. So like our CERC manager at the time, I think was Donna or Katie, I can't really remember. They had like the basic list. So they trained everybody on basic LEAP protocols. And then based on your position, like librarians learned a little bit more of an in-depth search field for both like CCS and the PAC. And then like our catalogers got like the big deep dive with everything. So we did have different people training different people on things. So each department head had a kind of like basic knowledge pack that they were teaching others.
Okay. That's helpful.
I was gonna say, Courtney, do you feel like that was effective to have like one person who's like the expert? No, you're saying no.
It was chaotic for us. And it made it hard. So like when certain people leave, that expert knowledge left with them. So piecemealing it between people, it was better, I think, if like all the department heads knew all of the same like knowledge together so that we would be able to help each other, train each other. As it was, like somebody was out for, I think, 2 weeks, their parent passed away. And so they took like a big chunk of knowledge that nobody else had access to, like while we were training. And then we were also under construction during that time. So it was just a nightmare altogether. So there are parts I've blacked out completely as well.
At Evanston, they sent all the full timers. Anyone who was full time went to the CCS training to train the part timers. So including in circulation, youth, and adult services, they all went to the CCS training and came back, and there was kind of a point person for each department, but the full timers all were there for that kind of basic knowledge.
Yeah, I just asked Nancy, and she said that she and Maureen did that. So I don't know about the other department heads. I don't know. I would assume they did as well. And then Maureen just.
When that migration happened, I was also part-time, and I don't have clear memories of specifically how the training happened, but I do remember that it was hybrid. I think me and another staff member came into CCS to do some training in person, and then we were doing a lot of training on our own, kind of in the can't remember what was called, like production or development, where it wasn't live, but we were practicing just to get familiarity.
Yeah. And
Okay, I have
then,
another question. Oh, sorry, Miko.
oh, that's okay. And then for the libraries that mentioned that, staff were just like playing around in the training database, were staff just kind of given like free reign to click around and explore on their own? Or did the library give them kind of like with the Algonquin, like a structured, this is what you want to do when you explore LEAP?
For us,
We
it was
did-
a little bit of, oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. For us, it was a little bit of both. Like they were able to just click around and experiment and see where things were, but they also had like little mini assignments, like create a library card. So there were some focused tasks as well.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna say. We did like little worksheets that they had to do. So it was like, today you're gonna learn to do a library card. And then we were like, what happens if it's somebody from this place that wants a library card, or if this person wants this book, and they had to do like little mini tasks.
I also think it'll be a little bit easier for a migration because the client is really being pushed away. So we were learning 2 systems at one time, depending upon your role, which was a lot. I mean, trying to go back through and learn the client and learning the circles. And I couldn't tell you because I very rarely am in the client, but that was a lot to download and process. So I think LEAP, a lot of people are web-based knowledgeable. As we've hired new employees, they kind of pick it up a lot quicker because that's what everything is right now for the most part. For if you have someone who you're hiring and they're knowledgeable within some sort of computer web-based product.
I'm sorry, Deb, I cut you off there.
I don't think that was me, but I do have a question. So for the big migration back in 2018, we did, like many of you mentioned, like a train the trainer model where some staff came to CCS and then those staff went back to the library and trained the rest of the department. But with our new library migrations in non-COVID times, CCS staff trained like every staff member. So part-timers, full-timers, etc. I'm interested, I know no one here is from a new member library, but I'm curious for your take on if you feel like one or the other is better. Like, do you think it's more helpful that CCS staff would like train everyone, or do you like sort of having management or full-time staff attend training with CCS and then have those individuals be responsible for like conducting training back at your library?
So I'll say that for our library and for me personally, a train the trainer was the way to go. I mean, I know our staff a little bit better and what I think would work. And it's not always feasible for them to attend training. Just we have, especially in CERC, there's so many part-time, or actually everybody's part-time, except for me. So that was very beneficial for our situation at the time, was to train the trainer and then bring it back. And I know someone else mentioned being able to lean on other managers was helpful to fill in those gaps if we had any. But I mean, we love all that stuff here at Algonquin. We're all about, oh, what's changing now? So, we kind of all had that vibe where we're like excited to do something new. And not all staff are. So I don't want to send my grumpy people to CCS. I'll keep them here and train them here. But also we know kind of what works for our situation. It's a little more individualized. I still, when I have new people, which feels like every 5 minutes, I still have them watch your training videos, and I pull out my paperwork from back then with pictures of Chris Bryant on my wallpaper on my computer from all the way back there in 2017. But yeah, we definitely benefited from the train the trainer.
That's helpful.
At Zion, we did train the trainer as well. And we basically still do train the trainer in each department. And then if someone needs specific, training, then whomever is responsible will train them.
I also think, I'm sorry, Miko, I didn't mean to cut you off. I also think train the trainer works because you guys have the foundation. You all have the foundation of what the expectation of the minimum that we have to do is as a library, and then going back and making it your own. So, because if I gone to another library, they do things completely different, and then it would cause confusion. There was some confusion when we went, but it was still, we were able to understand the different concepts. I think train the trainer is very important for like key roles and functions, especially cataloging groups or the adult services, creating the shortcuts for search functions and but yeah, I really like the train the trainer model.
I'm happy to, if you think of anything else related to train the trainer, throw it out there. But I wanted to ask, so I think pretty much every library here said they did kind of a blended training situation. Looking back then, were there things that you felt lent itself, like topics, or parts of LEAP that lent itself better to like an in-person training situation versus like a self-guided or a video type asynchronous content?
Well, I'm not sure this is what you're asking, but just thinking in terms of now, when we train people, I created a video for offline. Just for my staff to say this, to know which icon they click on and, you know, all of that kind of stuff. So things that we don't do very often and that we all forget how to do when we have to do it. I found, you know, that video is really helpful. For things that we do every day, we just train them in person and.
Okay. See where I am on my list. And when you have, and this is not necessarily, but just like software tools in general, when you have something new that you need to learn, do you find it easier to have some time with it ahead of time just to click and explore before receiving formal training? Or do you prefer having like that formal training first and then being let loose to explore on your own?
I like the option of exploring before having the formal training, just to have a little bit of familiarity with it before getting formal training.
I agree with Rachel.
I agree.
I do too, because I think it can be overwhelming if you're trying to learn it when you aren't familiar with the layout yet.
Any other comments or just about training in general? Doesn't have to necessarily be related to the migration. Like as your training staff, if there's anything that you found particularly helpful.
A lot of times I have to jump in CERC if people are not there or people are on vacation. And I absolutely positively still panic when I have to create a library card, because my line starts getting longer and longer. And so, yeah, I still panic with that. I'm trying to get them to set up a separate station for library cards or someone that's anywhere, you know, in the library that knows how can sit with that patron while you still wait on the other patrons. But nobody's taken me up on that idea.
I think the way I look at library cards is that as long as, you know, our patrons fill out a paper form while we're doing the library card. And essentially all the information we need is on there. We've looked at their license and their ID and everything. And even if they totally screw up the library card, we have all the information we need. So the patron can be long gone and we can go back and fix it. So I try to just calm my staff down. Don't worry if you don't get it right the first time. You know, we'll fix it before it's all said and done. So let those lines form. Don't worry. It's okay.
I also think teaching someone how to copy and merge, like as we were talking about library cards, if you have a family of 5, you just make one card and you can copy and copy and copy, and you have all that information, especially if they're little kids, you do the parent first and then just alter. I think there's some nuances that would be really helpful to just be trained properly on, especially like merging accounts or a pack reg, what this looks like, what you need to change, know that you need to renew the card. Sometimes like everyone learns a little differently. And I think people need to be handheld the first time, especially some managers may just want that option and being able to say, hey, CCS, if we get enough people, could you do this? You know, maybe just as a migration comes in new libraries, if there's multiple libraries and it's a larger library or a smaller library, create the option. I think some people just want that option. And if it's not done, then you don't have to do it. I don't know. I know it's a lot of work for CCS to kind of put the trainings together in the videos and go through things. But again, it's just way different people learn differently. That's why I always ask in an interview, how do you learn? So.
Ours is, the biggest issue is the ID issue, and then finding out if they live in the right area to, you know, have a library card with us. And, you know, one of our villages is half one library and half the other. And, you know, we have a lot of unincorporated areas. So you have to look all of that up each time. And that takes time.
Do you
And
ever
then-
use that Illinois State Library map? And
Yes,
then plug in the address? Yeah.
yes.
So it sounds like also being able to have like on-demand resources, just making sure that staff know where to find and easily access those on-demand resources for when there's like those on-the-spot type of situations.
Mhm.
Does anyone use our online courses for training new staff? How is that going?
It's going well. I mean, again, we don't do everything that is available on those courses. So I try to, you know, just mention, hey, we don't use associations or things like that you talk about. But I use that, like we were talking, like, what do you do first? Let them play in the training or whatever. I have them sit through those before we train so that they understand the words, you know, the lingo or whatever, especially people new to libraries. I don't use all of them, but I do use a number of them for circulation.
Same. I'll also use them for like retraining staff if I've noticed that they're having some issues retaining how to do certain things. I'll have them sit down in front of those and watch them, read through them, especially if they're like in downtime and don't really have anything to do. And it's going good. They're like nice, quick sessions for everybody.
We use them as well.
Okay, I'm the outlier here. I sort of forgot about them. I do once in a while, you know, I'm mostly for myself. I'll pull something up and look, but we are very much hands-on with our new staff.
Yeah, we use them for new staff too, and I found it's very helpful, especially the introductory videos, to help them get familiar with the layout a little bit. And then once they start playing with it, they can, like when we have them do a library card, they have some context for that. So we do a little bit of both. Sometimes they get the system first, sometimes they get the videos first. It partly depends on timing and what trainers we have available, but it's definitely been a helpful resource.
If, well, if you do think of anything that comes to mind, like you suddenly remember 5 years ago, just kidding, man. Don't hesitate to shoot me an email with any details. Deb, do you have any other questions that you wanted to post to the group?
I don't think so. And just for some context for the group, we are potentially adding another library next year, which is why we're just curious kind of what has been effective for all of you. With COVID, you know, we unexpectedly had to train Palatine and Grayslake completely virtually. So fortunately, that training was really successful. We built all those online courses, but now we're sort of facing like, okay, we have so many options here to train a potential next library, you know, what really is the best approach. So I think you guys have given us a lot of good tips and ideas for what we could do with the next library, if they are approved by governing board. It's Warren Newport, for those of you who are interested. Their board has voted to join CCS, so it will go to governing board for an official vote next month.
So, yeah, stay tuned for updates in October. Okay, well, that was we're to the end of the agenda. So our next meeting is set for Friday, December 9th at 9:30 in the morning, which seems like a far away. It will be here so fast. With that, can I have a motion to adjourn?
I motion to adjourn.
I second.
Rachel seconds, okay. And we are adjourned at 10:47 a.m.